or it helps them enjoy life a bit more. What do you do now? Well, first off, we suggest a model. Now, that we call this our product development model. There's a section on ideas generation, screening, testing the feasibility of your ideas, and then developing your ideas into a prototype or service and launching them onto the market. Now, first off, you may have an idea, but we suggest that you sit down and come up with as many possible ideas as you can and brainstorm. When you've got the list of ideas, you need to screen them. Cut out those ones that you think won't work, aren't the right place, the right time, and so on. And you can recycle those ideas for another opportunity later. Now, I'll cover a little bit on idea screening and then a little bit on feasibility assessment. And I'll move on to the next screen for that. So when you screen your ideas, sit down and methodically capture all your ideas, put them all in one place, and write down the key features that differentiates one idea from the other. And then methodically go through and analyse those best ideas to find out if they're feasible. Now, there's a lot to feasibility assessment, but I've covered off 5 key points, and I'm going to cover market analysis in a little bit more information. But what do I mean by market analysis? Things like everybody knows to work out who's your target market, but you also need to work out, is there a market willing to pay a good price for it? Who will actually buy your product? What phase is your target market at? Is it expanding or is it a contracting market? Do you understand how your customers would really use your product or service? Is it safe to use? Can it be distributed without having to meet industry standards and regulations? How will you distribute it to your customers? And is there enough of a margin in it for you to do it? Now, they're questions that people don't necessarily address. And in a little more detail, you also need to really think about what is your competitive advantage. What makes your product significantly better value to the customer than other competing products in the marketplace? Now, to do that, you really need to look at your competitors. You need to know who they are. You need to have a summary, an idea of what their products are and what their strategies and objectives in selling in the market are. And you also need to have an idea of the strengths of the market. Again, is it a growing market? Is it got a lot of competitors in it? Is it easy to get into, etc., etc.? The key with your competitive advantage is unless you can explain that to your customers, people won't be compelled to change from what they're currently doing. It has to be persuasive. Now, second part, market analysis. You really need to look at whether it's feasible to take your product or service to market. Is it going to be profitable? Now, to look at that, you need to see where you sit in the supply chain. And I'll give an example of this in a minute. But how do your products actually reach your customers? What are the costs involved? And will there be enough of a margin in it to cover your costs and on-selling costs and so on? Now, for the example, I want to look at one that's familiar to all of us, and particularly to me, wine industry supply chain. If we just look at the most simple supply chain, you have the grower who produces the grapes on the vine, you have the winemaker, you also have the wholesale or retail distribution channel, and that's what it takes to get to your glass. Now, when I talked about understanding whether there's enough of a margin for you, have a look at the costs involved. Now, this is from an actual winery. That $20 bottle of wine that you buy, have a look at what's left for the winery at the bottom. Can you make enough money? Can that vineyard make enough money to survive? So this is just an example of the sorts of things you need to consider when you're doing your market analysis and working out where the opportunity is for you and your product and service. Now, next I'm going to move on how you're going to take your product to market, a little bit about commercialization paths. Now, this graph is useful because it illustrates your control of your idea on the bottom axis and the commercialization risk involved in that path on the vertical axis. Now, the easiest commercialization path is just to sell your idea. You don't have any control of how it goes, but it's a very low risk for you. Now if you go up a bit further, the most risky but it gives you the best control of taking your idea to market is to do it all yourself in-house. You bear all of the risk of product development, marketing and so on, but you have complete control of how it goes. And the various other paths fall along those axes. Now the purpose of this graph is just to get you to think about that and to be aware there are other options. But let's come down to what is the most appropriate pathway for you. And you really have to sit down and have a good hard look at the facts. What's your appetite for risk? What are your objectives, the timing, the circumstances around you? What finance is available? What stage of development, how close to being market ready is your product or service? And you need to go through this thoroughly. If in doubt, seek advice. Now strategies. You have your idea, your product and service. Think about other applications than the first one. There might be a different application for your product or service. If the market that you want to get into is quite difficult to access, start with something smaller and more accessible. For example, hybrid cars are popular now, but the hybrid, in fact the electric motor, started off in electric vehicles. They got them into golf buggies first, got them acceptable, and then scaled up. Think about using a complementary asset. Now by that I mean something that product that might belong to another company and that you might be able to collaborate with. And I'll give an example of that in a moment. Also think about broadening your offering to include an educational aspect. For example, you may need to educate your potential customers about what makes your product different from the others. And again, I'll illustrate that again in a moment. Now let's come back to the using a complementary asset. And I use here the example of Nike and Apple. Now for those of you who are runners, you probably know about this. But there was an opportunity for Apple to use its iPod technology in terms of streaming, running, and to produce a new product or service that allowed people to adjust and tune their run, as I said. So there's a small transmitter in the shoe, and there's software in the iPod that enables the runner to change the tempo, to adjust, and so on. This opened up an opportunity that was bigger for both companies than just Nike selling ordinary shoes and just Apple selling fixed tunes. And this is a new product or service. Coming to the educational aspect, think about perhaps the need to educate your potential customers. Now there are some examples here. Think about using your implementation partners, your distribution partners to help educate. Think about promoting at conference and seminars, but also think about standards that are important. For example, if your product or service is particularly energy efficient, and that's one of the ways you differentiate yourself, then there are standards that are useful to illustrate that and that show the difference in your product and your competitor's product. And I've just put the energy rating up there as an example. So, what next? You know your target market, you've identified your competitive advantage and you know how you're going to promote it. Now you need to get out there and do some marketing. Now I'm only going to cover this briefly, but I'm come to the most important point, which is understanding your value proposition. Customers buy benefits, not technology. What's the benefit of the iPod? Well, it's good looking, it's easy to use, it's a lot lighter than carrying around those 1980s boom boxes. It's visually appealing, it has a good brand, it's very convenient. That's how a customer views the opportunity of the iPod and the music. They can have all of their music easily available. Suppliers, on the other hand, think in terms of features, and quite often so do the people who are developing the product or service. They think it's multifunctional, they think about the warranty terms, and they think about the technology specifications. But you're selling to a customer, so you need to know what the value is and how your customers see it. If your product can deliver a unique benefit that no other competitor's product can match, then you can set a higher selling price. But you need to know what that value is. Now just to give an example of what I mean by comparing benefits and the value proposition, just look at these couple of examples here. Customers don't buy V8 engines, they buy speed. You don't buy the lightest laptop, you buy the opportunity to work wherever you want because you can take it with you. Now this doesn't mean that features aren't important. Customers will often want to know the features and specifications, but they often decide that to differentiate between products after they've thought about the benefits. So benefits are key, and understanding your value proposition to your customer is key. Now a little bit about marketing. Marketing has changed. We're all well aware of the digital world, and Google has very much changed the way that people market. It used to be that if you were a customer, you received information. It was sent to you, and all that information was generated by the person who's manufacturing, who's selling, and they pushed that information out to you, and you were just a passive recipient. But that's changed now, especially with the online world. The customer searches for information. So when you are marketing, you have to think of positioning something from the customer's point of view. And iTunes is a good example of that. The comparison between having music when you want, how you want it, and just the song you want, as opposed to previously having to go to a record store and only able to buy what they had there. So a little bit about marketing following on from that. You need to be online. Every business needs a website, and the website needs to be focused on the customer and how the customer finds information and presented from a customer point of view, not from the business's own point of view. With your existing customers, it's worth providing information to them. Email marketing newsletters, very cost effective, but be aware of the Spam Act, as it's called. You must provide people with the option to unsubscribe or opt out of your information that is being sent. Don't forget to talk to your existing customers. It's often said that 80% of your income comes from 20% of your customers. So find out what channels they like. Are they interested in YouTube, podcasts, webinars, etc., etc.? What methods do they like to find out about new products and services? And if you're starting off a new business, promoting something new where you don't have an existing customer base, try low-cost promotional tactics to get things going. So for example, discounts for particular groups, time-based pricing, so if it's off-peak, it might be a bit cheaper. That's one of the things that energy companies differentiate themselves on. You might have competitions, free gifts, you might have trade-in allowances, loyalty programs like Coles and Woolies, or you might make it a big part of your marketing to support community events and get your name out there. Now, advertising and promotion. I've said a bit about online marketing, but that doesn't mean that the traditional marketing channels are dead, and there's some interesting research here that's found that print ads in newspapers still score about 26% of responses. TV ads and radio do well. And for those of you who are thinking that it's all into apps and games and so on, actually that's quite low levels of successful marketing. So find out what your customers want, what the channels are, focus on providing them information in the way that they want, and then use things like Google Analytics and other software and other methods to make sure that you can track how successful your marketing is, which customers are buying from which channels. That's important, otherwise you could be wasting your marketing dollar. Now lastly, the point of marketing is to get your brand out there. Your brand is your most important asset. And when it comes to things like intellectual property, that is often your trademark and your domain name. These sort of things are very important. Make sure that you protect them if they're important, and make sure that you use that brand as part of your promotion. That way people can engage and identify with your brand. Now that wraps up my quick overview of the types of information and the things to think about. Now I'm just going to cover off a little bit about potential resources. Of course, there is the AIC, the company to which I belong, and we run workshops, we do market research, we do commercialization consulting for businesses, we have IP strategy and licensing assistance available for people. We run the Queensland Inventors Service on behalf of Decidian and the Queensland Government. We have an innovation toolbox that's online, and we also assist businesses with their R&D tax incentive claims. There's also Oz Industry. Now Oz Industry administers the R&D tax incentive, so you go to them for information, and I put their website and their hotline up there for more information for you. A little bit about the R&D tax incentive. You must be a proprietary limited company, and you must have spent more than $20,000 in a year. just a little bit down there. For more information, go to Oz Industry site, please. Other sorts of information for those of you who are exporters: Austrade, Export Market Development Grants, EFIC, and of course Queensland, the Trade and Investment Queensland. Websites are provided there for you. Now, some of you will have heard of Commercialisation Australia grants and be aware of Enterprise Connect's own services. These sorts of things are just currently on hold pending the government deciding what it wants to do with that audit report. And last but not least, the Queensland Government itself has very good online tools and resources. I've just put a screenshot up there, and that's a web link for you to have a look at. Now, in addition to government services, there are also incubators or shared workspaces available for people. Now, as part of these incubators and shared workspaces, they often provide not just a desk and a computer, but also mentoring and other business assistance for people who are starting up. Some of these centres specialise in software, for example Microsoft, and iLab. Others are more technology based across other types of technology. If you're interested, they all have websites. Have a look at what they offer. And there's also, be aware that in your region there are regional business events put on by government departments, by chambers of commerce and so on. And AIC also travels up and down the country and puts on an event. Please have a look at those forms of information. There's good quality stuff out there. Now, just before I conclude, I want to come down to a very important point, which is the characteristics of entrepreneurs. To be successful in taking your idea to market, it's a long haul, and you do need tenacity, passion. You have to be able to tolerate ambiguity. You have to be resourceful. You still have to have that vision of what you're trying to achieve and that self-belief to drive it through. But you have to be flexible. The path may not turn out the way you anticipated. And you have to be prepared to break the rules to do something different. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our guest speaker, Penny Curnow of Vortex Intech Control Proprietary Limited. And Penny is a fine example of exactly those characteristics of entrepreneurs that I just talked about. Okay, over to you now, Penny. Thank you.
Well, hello, and hello to my fellow entrepreneurs. I am really happy to see you. I'm just fixing my screen, so that will come on in a moment for you, I hope. Sorry, just a minute, and I'm hoping you can see that now. When I was first asked to speak about our journey, the phrase came to mind from my brother-in-law, who was the actual original inventor, was, "We're going to make millions of dollars and we're going to revolutionise the world." That's what he believed. We had lots of people telling us about all of these wonderful figures that we were going to make, and the photo there is my brother-in-law on the left, my husband, now husband, in the middle, and of course there was Henry Palaszczuk. Because you see, we won so many different awards. Our journey started 10 years ago, back in 2004. And you'll see here we won the New Inventor Show. And there's my husband just after we'd actually won People's Choice as well as the show. And you'll see a photo here of him being photographed. On the day we won the Smart Ideas Award, we were very fortunate that we got some grants. But back when we first started, these grants were only very new, and commercialisation in Australia was only very new at the time. As you can see there, we also got onto the yellow and white pages of the phone book up in the Whitsundays. And one of the things that actually happened, and my PowerPoint is going on its own here, when we invented this product, we invented it because there was a need. And this need was, you can see moths there. This was invented out in Kainoona, in the middle of Queensland, and people couldn't eat because the moths were so bad. This was at the Blue Heeler Hotel. And so my brother-in-law decided that, and he lived out there in central Queensland, decided that he wanted to come up with a solution. So he did. And you'll see in this next slide that here's the invention. It was an old 44-gallon drum. Back then the farmers used to get a 44-gallon drum with some water in it and burn some diesel, and that would actually kill the insects. And my brother-in-law had also a little small farm that he would grow tomatoes and lettuce, and of course they were eating the tomatoes and lettuce as well. So he developed this and thought that the light would attract water. Well, it did, and of course today this is what the vortex insect trap looks like. And just very briefly, if you have a look at the trap, the insects are attracted to the light and they fall into the water and they actually drown. We recycle the water, and so far we haven't found an insect that is resistant to drowning yet, which is good for us. We also catch the insects in a 5-hectare radius in multiple situations. So just imagine for a moment a cotton farm that might spray 12 sprays a year and cost $1 million plus to use those sprays, and of course environmentally they're not very good. We can put these traps in to any farming situation and reduce the sprays. So you'll see the trap here is in a beautiful flower farm, and that's what the trap is looking like now. It's solar panelled and also 240 volt. So that's pretty much the story with this is what we catch. This is in one night. There's 5.2 kilos in one of the small traps, so you can see that it works very effectively. We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on research to say that this trap works and it catches all the right kind of insects and not our beneficials. So that's the good story. 10 years down the track, wow, what a journey. We started off with so much passion. We had so much passion, and we believed all of the telephone book marks, what the telephone books told us, that, you know, you just don't know what you don't know. We're very successful in small business in the past, but commercialisation is so different to small business. And as you can see, this pelican's landed on what he thinks is a rock, but yeah, little does he know that it's not quite what he thought. And this is what commercialisation is now, and what I view it as. You don't know what you don't know, even though you might be very successful in small business. We didn't know what we didn't know. We went in and we were advised in many different directions, but the directions weren't necessarily the right directions. When Sam was talking before about, really figure out what you need. Do you want to license? Do you want to sell it? Do you want to manufacture? We weren't asked those questions. It was assumed that we were going to manufacture. So we funded all of this together with our shareholders. We're told to go into an unlisted public company, and which was massive for us. We had no idea what a CEO or CFO was. We were just normal, everyday people. So we were quite confused. And we didn't ask the right questions. So all of a sudden we had 2 unlisted public companies. We were manufacturing. We'd used the money that we had gone out and pitched for. We learned how to pitch. And 12 months later we had a couple of CEOs through the company who we thought were good, because my husband and I, we weren't CEOs. We were just everyday people that had a fantastic idea and that were very passionate. And we were painted all of a sudden in 18 countries, and no one tells you, or the patent attorneys certainly don't tell you, that come when it falls due in 18 months, that each of these countries you actually could get an objection, and each of these objections can cost up to $1,250 per objection per country. And even though there were 18 countries in Europe, there's 19 countries just in Europe, so nobody told us that, and we didn't ask the right questions. You don't know what you don't know. So we ended up, some 18 months later, we lost all the money. We've not lost it, it was spent, $350,000 on patents. We spent money on the manufacturing, we spent money on different marketing, and we were actually in the not the right kind of market. Global financial crisis hit us as well. So there was no risk mitigation. We didn't look at those very, very important things. The other thing that we found was that, and you'll see here, make sure that everybody in your boat is rowing in the same direction. There's a lot of people that come to you and they've got these wonderful theories about where you should go, but it will be because of their agendas, not yours. And this is where, when Sam was talking earlier about make sure you know what you want to do and what direction you want to go in, that's so important. Because we came across a lot of people that wanted to take us into different directions, and we said yes because we believed that they were looking after us. in the end, my back went on me in 2005, and we ended up having to go down to Brisbane. And I was flat on my back. My husband ended up, we had a manufacturing plant up in the Whitsundays, and we ended up, just the two of us. I ended up on my back with a bed over my desk, a desk over my bed, rather. I was on the bed. And we sold, with a telephone book and a telephone, over $250,000 worth of product. My husband would make them in the shed. Because in the beginning we got so involved in the R&D that we actually didn't really get a good sales team or a marketing team that could get this out to market. And in the end, again, as I said, we spent an awful lot of money that we allowed the board, and we also took responsibility on. So sold our last asset, and we have had to really start again, both with very much eyes wide open. And the last few years of our journey has been about looking after our current customers, finding and keeping the integrity. Integrity is very important in commercialisation, maintaining all of those wonderful relationships and never ever giving up. And I say that because we now, the relationships that we've had, the customers that we've looked after over these years, the trials that we did over those years, and the integrity that we have, sleeping with your head on the pillow every night is very important. We never gave up. We decided that we were going to maintain the companies, even though we ran out of product. Only 2 months ago we sold our last product, and we didn't have enough money to manufacture. And we thought, what are we going to do? And 2 months ago, just as this happened, we got a phone call from one of our old colleagues who said, we want to order some product. And we said, look, we don't have any to sell. And he said, well, can I license, because I've already sold your product into Europe? And I cried over the phone and said, you've got to be kidding, this is wonderful. So we're now in the process, some 10 years down the track, in a completely different direction than what we were. My brother-in-law died some years ago, and I'd love him to be here to see this today, because I think he would be very proud. So we're licensing now throughout the world. We're about to sign those agreements. It's very, very exciting for us. And I think, don't ever give up. If I was to do it again, knowledge is power. Find out as much as you possibly can, because you can go down so many different paths. You need to have clarity around what it is that you need for you, not anyone else. What's right for you? Is manufacturing right? Is licensing right? What's right for you? There is so much information around now that you can go and find out, much more than there was 10 years ago. And I have a lot to thank the Australian Institute of Commercialisation for, because they truly are an amazing place to go to source information freely, and they do it with passion. So in summary, these key points would have saved us an awful lot of heartache, but I think have passion, but please remain realistic and don't get carried away with the phone book figures. Be willing to give away part of your potential future earnings. My brother-in-law wanted to keep it all, but 1% of something is better than having 100% of nothing. So be willing to look at people that are better at you and that can take your product perhaps to market. Be very careful about who you deal with, and please make sure that everyone's going in the same direction. Do as much as you can to understand the market and your customers. And above all, above all, make sure that you learn. Go and do your company director's course, go to Ideas to Market, improve your commercialisation skills. Consider all your commercialisation options, as I mentioned before. Do you want to license? Do you want to sell it? Do you want to manufacture? What is it that you want and is going to be good for you? And above all, questions are the answers. Get very good at asking questions, even if you think they're the wrong sort. So, look, thanks very much for listening. I hope that I've shared, that's our journey. There's a lot more journey to come, but you know, it's taken us 10 years. My wish for you is it is a lot shorter because you'll be a lot more informed. Thank you very much for listening, and thanks to Sean and Sam and the Australian Institute of Commercialisation, and of course QMI for asking me to speak. Over to you, Sam.
Well, thank you very much for that really interesting story, Penny. Now we're open to questions. I would like to ask people if they would like to type into their questions, or how else can we do that, Sean? Just type into the box, type into the chat box that's down there, and we'll address those questions one by one. Are there any questions of the audience? Does anybody wish to ask anything of Penny of any details, or myself? We're open for this period. I think Penny gave a very good summary, and the key points there about passion but realism. Educate yourself as much as you can and be aware of all the options involved in commercialising, not just the most obvious one. Now, just to let everybody know, we will send around an email for those of you signed up, and we'll have the link where you can find this presentation online as part of that. So we're getting some questions coming in. Penny, there's a question for you. I'll pass over to you.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Sorry, I just am having trouble seeing that question. Sam?
I'll just read it out for you then.
Thank
Question
you.
for Penny. Did the IP lawyers give you an idea of the costs at the beginning?
No, they didn't. One of the challenges was we got the cost for the initial IP, and this is one of the traps that I certainly would never fall into in the future. But no, they gave us the cost of what it was we licensed, or we patented in the PCT, which has got 119 countries. One of the other things they didn't tell us was the countries that were outside of the PCT. And then we didn't know, they gave us some very basic information, and look, I've found that unless you ask the questions, they do not give you the answers, so beware. And then of course, you know, every objection that comes in, so no, we weren't given that information.
Okay, thank you for that, Penny. I received a question from Naomi. She says, if you have an idea that is new, it's difficult to compare it to an existing enterprise. How best can you evaluate its viability? Well, the AIC operates from the perspective that it's called market pull, where the idea is pulled through to the market rather than having a product and pushing it out to market. Now, by that, if you have something that's genuinely new and you can't find a comparison, you need to really do your market analysis very closely. So you need to look who are going to be your customers, how are they going to use it, and those sorts of things. Are there barriers to market? You might, if you look around, find that there are competing products or services in a different sector of the industry, because the point of putting a product or service out in the market is to solve a problem for their customer. Now, you might not be aware, but that problem might be being solved by a different product or service that's in a different sector of the industry. So you need to look very broadly for how this problem is currently being solved, or other ways that it could be solved. I hope that answers your question, Naomi. Okay, question for Penny now from David. Penny, how did you ensure that everyone was on the same page? How did you deal with conflict between business partners? Over to you, Penny.
Thanks, Sam. Wow, that is a really interesting. Look, to be really honest, we didn't in the beginning. This was one of the skills that we had to learn, to be really honest with you. And we learned it very, very quick. Now I ask lots of questions, I frame things, I do a lot of due diligence on people that I get involved with these days. I also make sure that when anyone that I come into being with, I want to know, have they been successful? In relation to business partners, there's lots of agreements that you really need to think about, and we've got a communication strategy now, and very much a conflict resolution strategy, where if I had those things before, I think it would have made a big, big difference. We learnt the hard way. So it really is about being prepared. It's about asking the right questions. And even if you don't know what those right questions are, it's being not afraid to ask the wrong question, because you'll eventually get there. So in the beginning we didn't do it very well. We're doing a lot better now. Sam?
Thank you, Penny. I'll just take the next question, which was from Troy. Troy asked, is the R&D tax incentive still available when other grants are not? Yes, it is. The R&D tax incentive is a right, not a grant. If you have spent the money and you've done it correctly and you've met all the requirements, you do get your tax return. However, be aware that you will be audited. So make sure that you set it up properly and that you are claiming correctly. But it's not a grant. You have to have spent the money first. Okay, second question's for Penny from Christian. Penny, I'll take the question above, which is from David. Sorry. Thanks, Penny. Your story was really interesting. Could you have achieved what you have achieved without the initial grants? Penny, over to you.
That's a really interesting question. Look, our original grant was, there's two sides to this story. Now, I would say yes, because I know a lot more. Back then, no. So I'm going back 10 years ago. The grants, what the grants do is they really do help you to be fairly specific with where you want to go. They assist you depending on the type of grant, and I think this is really important. You need to look at the grants that are available and then decide if your business is a match with those grants and vice versa. And that's probably one of the questions that you need to ask yourself, because sometimes, as much as grants are great, they're usually either a 50-50 or an 80-20. You've still got to come up with the balance of the money. And the grant also can stifle you at times, so it's really important to it's like a marriage. You need to make the match. So I suppose, that's twofold. I hope that answers your question, David, but thanks for asking. Sam?
Okay, this question for Penny from Christian. Penny, how easy was it to raise money for your idea, and what advice would you give to others who need to fund their idea? Over to you, Penny.
That's also a great question. Look, for us, we were taught how to pitch and how to go for investment. And this is where I say, I'm going to go back, you need to actually know how much money it is that you want to raise. Then we need to understand what that actually means, because, and you can only do that with the right kind of financial advice. To raise money, you need an information memorandum if it's under 2 million, I think. I'm not sure whether that's right now because I'm not up to it now, but anything over that you need to go into a prospectus. We had an information memorandum. We were raising under 2 million. We raised we raised 1.3 million. And people will believe in you. They believe in you and they'll believe in your product. You need to get the right kind of investors, and look, I didn't know about the right kind of investors back then. The mum and dad investors, they're the ones that generally can't afford to lose when they give seed investment. Decide whether it's seed investment, angel investment, venture capital investment. Go and learn about, again, what kind of money you need to raise. Is it easy? It's easy if you do the right thing and you have integrity. And that you know the journey that you want to go on. Is it easy to keep it? No, it's not. That's probably one of the hardest things. And then is it easy to then make money? No, it's not. Not unless you've got the right people that are sitting around you that are guiding you in the right direction. Over to you, Sam.
Okay, thank you, Penny. Two questions for me. One from Sarah, who's asked, are there any incentives for providers of services, or are they mainly for products? Well, the R&D tax incentive is a right, so it applies to products and services. And in terms of grants and so on, it depends. You have to have a look at what the actual requirements for those grants are. So I would say, Sarah, have a look at some of those sites that I've mentioned earlier and see what's suitable for you. Next question from Amanda. Is there somebody who I can ring who can point me in the right direction in relation to commercialising my particular product, which is an app? Yes, Sarah. The AIC is one of those organisations who can help, but also have a look at our website, but also have a look at some of the other sites that we listed, such as Queensland Government, Oz Industry and so on. There's a lot of good quality information out there to help you step through the process, but there's also us. And a similar question from Scott. Scott said he's been trying to sell a product through distribution networks, but's decided that selling or licensing their technology is a more suitable option for him. Yes, Scott, you can come and talk to the AIC about that. We can help you with that. Okay, and we also have a question directed at both myself and Penny from Roseanne. She said, are the resources available to help you make a prototype? Some of those resources I referred to earlier, such as Commercialisation Australia and so on, they're on hold at the moment, but they can help you in developing a prototype, depending on whether you meet all of their requirements. But I would say that generally you would probably have to build and test a prototype yourself as the first rule to show that it does work. And then once you've demonstrated that idea, there's more assistance available to help you. Okay. Are there any more questions from the audience to either of us, please? Penny, is there anything you'd like to add on the journey and whether it's been worth it?
Gee, there were times I didn't think it was. Look, I think for anyone that is about to enter into the commercialisation area, keep your passion, but you know, just be realistic. Don't sell your last asset, please. Don't do that unless you do it with eyes wide open and you have that real belief. When I read through Sam's what it takes to be an entrepreneur, being tenacious is something that you absolutely have to do, and certainly be prepared to break rules. And there's a big story around that with what we did actually to raise some money. So I think that's it. Just eyes wide open, everyone, please. Keep your passion, but be realistic. And you know, don't be scared to ask questions, and also I suppose the other big thing is figure out what's right for you. That's probably the biggest thing. Sam.
Okay, thank you, Penny. We'll start to wrap up now if you'd like to type out the last couple of questions, but I'll just address one from Louise, who said, if we have a product that should be patent protected, what would be our first step? Well, I would say that based on Penny's discussion earlier, be sure that patent protection is appropriate for what you are trying to do. And then if you are sure about that, then you need to go speak to a patent attorney who will help you in protecting that. Okay, now if there's a last couple of questions, if people could submit them now, and then we'll wind up this session. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any more questions coming in at the moment. All right. Yep.
I just saw one from, sorry Sam, I just saw one from Nikki. Penny, can you please expand more on risk mitigation? And I'd love to do that because I think that is really, really important. Look, I am probably one of the most positive people in the world, but I now do risk mitigation on everything. And if I had have done that in the very beginning, I didn't know what I didn't know back then. But looking at the downside actually gives you a lot of information for the upside. And it also gives you a lot of the ability then to be able to see things that could happen before they even happen doing risk mitigation. So Sam will be able to help you with doing some risk mitigation workshops, I'm sure. There is a process, a good SWOT analysis will help you with that. And please, look, I know some of you will go, look, why do I have to do that? Well, unless you want to end up like we nearly did, which was literally having nothing left, your risk mitigation can be your best friend. There's lots and lots of things, and I'm sure Sam from the AIC and Sean can help you with that. Sam?
Thank you, Penny. That's a good point. And on that, I'll wrap the session up. A good part of risk mitigation, understanding the steps involved. Please do come along to one of our Ideas to Market seminars if they're in your area, and we will be running them up and down the country. So have a look at our website, see when the next one is, and plus we'll also have some more webinars. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and thank you very much to our guest speaker, Penny. And I'll wrap that up for today. Good afternoon. Goodbye.